The church in Languedoc it's often said it was corrupt, but it was probably no more corrupt than the church elsewhere. But corrupt meaning there were a lot of bad eggs, corrupt bishops, and it was very common for the priests to live with concubines. The church's message of poverty was contradicted by its enormous tax-gathering apparatus. And there's another reason. In many ways, the best and the brightest of the church in the 12th centuries did not go into these towns and villages. The best and the brightest, if you wish, were the monks. There was a new order of monks that was created called the Cistercians, attracting the best and brightest men of orthodoxy, founding monastic houses all over Europe. But these monasteries were once again out in the wilderness. It was the old model of monasticism. So brilliant men out in the wilderness, leaving the towns where there was this intellectual, spiritual effervescence, to the secular clergy, who might be corrupt, who might not know what exactly Christian orthodoxy was, might have very bad religious education. And so there was no response to the natural longing of the laity. In walked the heretics, in walked these visionaries, but in walked the Cathars.
What attracts people to the Cathars, I think, is, by and large, their genuinely high moral life.
Malcolm Lambert is a retired professor of history at the University of Bristol and author of books on the Cathars and on medieval heresy in general. Lambert clearly distinguishes between the mass of believers and the Cathar perfects, those who call themselves the good men and the good women. A perfect lived an austere life within the community and spread the faith.
A fundamental belief that all matter is evil and is the creation either of the devil as a fallen spirit or by the devil as an agent of an evil god or principle, that the business of the true Christian is to escape from this evil world of matter, to escape from a chain of being which pins souls which are really fallen angels, imprisons them in the creations of Satan across perhaps a whole series of lives. By accepting the consolamentum, being consoled in the contemporary phrase, accepting after careful preparation and choice the laying on of hands and the gift of the Spirit, they draw themselves out of this world of matter. They abstain from sexual intercourse, from the eating of meat, and live a moral life, not lying or stealing or engaging in works of bloodshed. They become, as it were, supreme monks, and if they persevere without any deviation from this rigid asceticism and this morality, they are secure of salvation. That small elite are the carrying class of the whole movement. The mass of followers await salvation and hope that they may be consoled on their deathbeds when they don't have to observe these crippling standards of renunciation. The consequences, of course, for Orthodox belief are quite clear. All sacraments must be rejected that involve the use of matter, baptism, the Mass. The whole structure of Catholicism is destroyed. You substitute for ornate churches simple houses in which people are consoled, with a quite limited ceremony. It has something, I think, of a Protestant appeal about it. It is magnificently simple. Do this, and you'll be saved.
I'm Beverly Kinsley. I'm a professor at Harvard Divinity School and a specialist in the history of medieval preaching and heresy. The Cathars saw themselves as the true church. They dedicated themselves to a life of asceticism, a life of simple service to each other. They taught each other trades, and it was also a community that was very strongly linked by families, and that was inspired by the Holy Spirit and that stood in opposition to the wealth and power of the Roman Church that they saw all around them. They were opposed to the Crusades. They were pacifists. They were opposed to material excess. And they were very committed to that as the true way of life. They saw themselves as being like the early Christians.
My name is René Weiss. I'm a professor of English literature at University College London.
René Weiss is author of The Yellow Cross, the story of the last Cathars.
The question people always ask is why in this particular region, what happened? And I think the history of the region effectively becoming very conscious of a big neighbour, i.e. France. That area was not part of France at that time. So in a sense, I mean, Catharism and the political desire for independence in the region certainly went hand in hand. And astonishing, to this day, in certain parts of Languedoc, people talk about les Français, as if the French were a culture apart, as it were.
Les bonnes femmes. Le mot cathare est un mot qui n'existe pas. Hein. Il a été très peu utilisé au Moyen-Âge, uniquement par un clerc rhénan.
The word cathar is a word that didn't exist, was used very little in the Middle Ages, and was never used in Occitania, in Languedoc. It's a word we use today in tourism and commerce, but neither the medieval heretics nor the southerners ever called themselves cathars. They called themselves Christians or apostles. Their believers called them good Christians, and the clergy good men and good women.
Bons hommes ou bonnes femmes.
French historian and author Anne Brenon reminds us that the terms we use in reference to the Cathars are mostly those coined by their persecutors. The victor gets to write the history. From a distance of 800 years, the terms don't seem pejorative. In the 12th century, though, they may have served as slander to demonize the enemy. Stephen O'Shea.
There's a debate about Cathar. Some hold that it comes from katharos, the Greek, which is where we get our word catharsis, which means a purification. Katharos means pure. But it's very unlikely that the church would call its worst enemies the pure. And in fact, the first time the term was used was in 1163 in the Rhineland, in what is now Germany, when some dualist heretics were detected and burned. The monk who described this burning said that these people were Ketzer, which is translated as Cathar, but Ketzer is Low German for a catter. Could be that he was calling them cat worshippers and practicing the obscene kiss, which is basically lifting a tail of a cat and kissing it.
The origins of Cathar terminology may be debatable, but the source of the Cathar belief itself, their particular dualist slant on Christianity, has been determined through research in Western and Eastern Europe. British historian Malcolm Lambert.
It's quite clear that it derives from the Eastern heresy of Bogomilism, which begins in Bulgaria with the parish priest Bogomil in the 10th century, and there is a landfall of Bogomilism moving into Europe.
We don't exactly know who the first Western Cathars were. We know that there were sightings in the 11th century, then a lot of sightings in the 12th century. One of the most famous was Bernard of Clairvaux, who was one of the greatest churchmen of the 12th century, a Cistercian. He was a confidant and a maker of popes. He was a preacher of crusades. He was the force behind this great Cistercian order, and he was the great champion of orthodoxy. He went down to Languedoc in 1145 to preach against what was perceived as heretics in Toulouse and in the area around Toulouse. He was feted. He was given all the honors due to him. A few heretics were offered up and they converted in style in Toulouse. He went on a preaching tour, a revivalist tour, and he went to a market town north of Toulouse called Verfeil. He was supposed to overawe the populace with his golden tongue. He got ready to speak in the church. The people laughed at him. Knights came riding into the church, came pounding on the doors of the church and the walls of the church, making his sermon inaudible. This would be equivalent to somebody silencing the President of the United States. at that moment, Bernard of Clairvaux realized this was not your ordinary heresy.